Men we reaped, what the pictures tell us. Pictures can speak 1,000 words. Despite Mississippi being a place of great pain for Jesmyn, she chooses to return to Delisle and raise her children there. This was a very hard decision for her, but in this picture you can tell that she looks very content to be standing in her hometown. The expression on her face represents a very determined and powerful woman. She disagrees with everything the town represents, but she wants her kids to experience some of the powerful things she experienced and raise her kids the right way. Jesmyn has such strong emotions toward her hometown because she always felt that the men that died around her all died simply because of who they were and where they were from. She feels that if the men around her hadn't grown up in Mississippi, then their lives would have turned out very different. The men she grew up around lived with a history of racism and economic struggle, with families who battled drug addiction and dissolution of family relationships. On page 8 of the prologue, Jesmyn explains, what was unspoken in this conversation was that these gangsters, ruthlessly violent and unothered by common human decency, were black. Jesmyn was the sole member of her family to leave home and pursue higher education, and as one of the few black students in her predominantly white school, she was often dehumanized. For most of her high school years, she was the only black girl in the school. She goes on to describe awful scenes, such as her classmates often staring at her while talking about black people. Jesmyn aims to counteract this degrading view of black people by honoring the 5 strong black men she describes in her memoir. This photo shows a bookstore in Pass Christian, Mississippi, called Pass Books. It's important to note that every visitor in the bookstore in this photo is white. In a predominantly white town, this bookstore is also extremely clean, organized, and modern. In Chapter 5, on page 87, Jesmyn explains where her love of books comes from. She says, I think my love for books sprang from my need to escape the world I was born into, to slide into another where words were straightforward and honest, where there was clearly delineated good and evil, where I found girls who were strong and smart and creative and foolish enough to fight dragons, to run away from home, to live in museums, to become child spies, to make new friends and build secret gardens. When she was a child, she associated reading with coping. Her mission was to find an outlet for her imagination and creativity by participating in a virtual world that was more orderly and safe than her own. At the time, she found these books very important because they gave her a chance to read about other girls who took risks and chose bravery. She needed a world to escape to, and her real life got too hard to handle. Books provided her the opportunity to escape for a couple of hours, so she fell in love with them. In this picture, we see Jesmyn outside her great-grandmother's house in Pass Christian, Mississippi. We know that her main inspiration for writing this memoir was where she grew up and the way she grew up, which was in poverty. Jesmyn consistently holds close to her belief that bad luck follows those who live in poverty. In this picture, you can see that the construction of the house is very dated and that almost every part of the house is tarnished. The exterior of the house is rusty and the paint job is obviously dated. The foreground of the picture includes patchy grass and an unfinished foundation of the house. All in all, the house just doesn't appear to be very well put together. It is very messy out on the front porch with various cords and crates thrown around. There are quite a few crushed beer cans and empty cases of beer underneath the tarnished wooden swing in the left frame of the picture, which supports the theme of alcohol and drugs being consistently used to medicate the men she talks about in her memoir. There is an old and rusty truck in the far right frame of the picture that looks like it may be as old as Jesmyn herself. The shutters in the window are crooked, dirty, and broken. One can assume the string lights on the ceiling of the porch have been forgotten and neglected for years, similar to the rest of the porch. In Chapter 11, titled We Are Here, on page 228, Jesmyn states, by the numbers, by all the official records, here at the confluence of history, of racism, of poverty, and economic power, this is what our lives are worth. Nothing. Growing up in poverty, it was difficult for Jesmyn to understand her place in society. From the beginning of her childhood, she felt as if everyone around her started with a head start in life due to her struggles with poverty and racism. This picture supports where Jesmyn came from and gives us a glimpse of what her life looked like as a young girl in Mississippi. These pictures show 2 of Jesmyn's strongest bonds, her bond with her uncles and her grandmother. On the left, the picture shows Jesmyn talking with her uncles in the house where she grew up. One of the windows inside the house looks to be boarded up, and her uncles appear to be very calm and relaxed. The one on the left is smoking a cigarette while they talk. The house is dated, with wooden walls and with wooden walls and flooring, yet very clean and neat. These are two of the men Jesmyn knew she could always go to for support. On the right, the picture shows Jesmyn and her grandmother embracing. It is also important to note the religious figure in the left part of the picture because religion did not play a very favorable role in her childhood. She rather discusses instances where she drank in order to hide from the truth because she didn't know where else to turn. At first, it may be difficult to realize they are hugging each other, but if you look into the reflection of the door, you can see that they are touching each other. You can tell by the way they are embracing that Jesmyn and her grandmother really love each other. In Chapter 7, titled We Are Watching, Jesmyn reflects on the inequalities of her mother and father she witnessed while growing up. On page 159, she says, "Both of us on the cusp of adulthood, and this is how my brother and I understood what it meant to be a woman. Working, dour, full of worry. What it meant to be a man. Resentful, angry, wanting life to be everything but what it was." This is a powerful quote that exploits the dynamic of the men and women around her when she was growing up. Throughout her memoir, Jesmyn discusses the difference in roles of the women and men in her life. She tussles back and forth with the stereotypes that surrounded her family to portray how men and women impacted her life as a young girl in Mississippi. She describes a society where the men are often absent, so the women stand in for family. She also adds that she grew up in a society where the men feel they can do no right. The women in her life were the glue that held the family together, as you can see in the picture on the right. But without the 5 influential men Jesmyn describes throughout her memoir, she would not be the woman she is today.